Hey everybody, Chad Wesley Smith here for Juggernaut Training Systems. Today we're going to be beginning our new series, Pillars of Bench Technique. So we're going to be bringing you 5 videos to cover what we see as the 5 most important concepts of good bench technique. If you haven't checked out our series like this for the squat, make sure to do so and be looking forward to one for both the conventional and sumo deadlift. And when we talk about these pillars of technique, we don't want to coach the bench or any of the lifts as a one-size-fits-all approach, because it's not like that because of different body proportions, strengths, weaknesses, injury history, so on and so forth. But there are a couple things that all great lifters are pretty much going to be in common on, and that's what we're really going to be focused on today. And speaking of great lifters, I'm joined by IPF World Champion Campeón del Mundo, Marisa Inda. That's for our Spanish-speaking audience. And Marissa is also one of the best benchers in the world with the American record of 95.5 kilos, about 210 pounds, in the 52 kilo class, 114 pounds body weight. How are you this morning?
I'm cold.
Cold? All right. Well, she's cold, I'm sweating, stuff happens. All right, so the first pillar that we're going to address today is the foundation of a good setup for the bench press, and that is going to be the feet. Of course, the great setup is important in all the lifts. It's very unlikely that if you don't set up well, that you're going to execute any of the subsequent parts of the lift very well. We're going to start with the feet because that's where stability is going to begin in the bench press. That's where tightness is going to begin. And different federations are going to have different rules about heel up, heel down, and we'll talk about both of those as we go. So, a couple different things to consider with foot placement is going to be the length, the lower leg length for the athlete. If you have someone with a very long shin, they're going to have a bit different setup than someone with a shorter shin, looking at tucked back or feet out in front, as well as the athlete's own flexibility. So as Marissa sets up, lifting in the USAPL and the IPF, she is required to bench with a flat foot. What we want to create is pressure into the ground through both feet. Generally, I'd say a wider foot position is better, as that's going to lend itself to a bit more stability than if Marissa's feet were kind of, move your feet like next to each other under the bench. Then if she had a narrower foot position, that bit wider foot position, more stable, wider base, generally better. But again, you may have to play around with that depending on how your shin length is. She's got her whole foot pushed into the ground. So foot position and how much arch and tuck the athlete gets in their setup is sort of inversely related to leg drive. An athlete who can get a bit more of like an extreme type of setup as Marissa does, feet tucked back more, she's going to have so much tension in her legs at the beginning. There's not going to be a lot of leg drive that's added from this because she's already pressing her feet into the floor, tension throughout the quads. So there's really no tension to be able to add to that beyond. So athletes who have their feet tucked back more aren't going to get as much leg drive generally, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a trade-off that the athlete needs to make, based on their own trial and error. So Marissa has pressure into her feet. We don't want to, she shouldn't be able to have her feet kind of bouncing around, and you see that especially if you coach like high school football or something, the happy feet athletes as they bench. So we want pressure into the feet. As we look in the horizontal plane, we should be able to see her knee below the level of her hip. This is going to help maximize tension throughout the leg. It's also going to help ensure that her butt does not come off the bench. Now, if this is the position that you're going for, but you have a hard time getting your heel onto the ground, if that's required for your federation, I'd suggest wearing weightlifting shoes to give you that extra, half inch, 3/4 inch clearance to get your heel down to the ground. Even if you are not required to have your whole foot on the ground for the bench press, generally we'll still encourage to have as much foot on the ground as possible. So if Marissa was to leave her heels way off the ground and just be up on her toes, I think this position, though, while you may be able to get a more extreme arch, tends to not be as stable because you don't have as much contact with the ground. It tends to be more difficult for you to transfer power from the legs into the floor and get some leg drive. So even if the heel ends up floating a little bit off the ground, let's say you're lifting the USPA and you're not required to have your heels down, trying to get as much foot down as possible is going to generally be better. Now, the other option besides having the feet tucked back behind with the knee lower than the hip is going to be to have the feet out wide and usually out in front of the athlete. This is going to be very common for bigger lifters maybe with a longer shin who aren't able to get that tucked back position, or if you just don't have the mobility in the quads and hips, and we'll talk about that a bit more, ways that you can work on that. So if Marissa has her feet out in front here, we're still trying to achieve knee below the level of the hip, and now she should feel pressure throughout her whole foot, and imagine as if she's driving her toes into the end of the shoes. A lot of people when they're in this position, I think, tend to push more into their heels, and driving down with the heels it makes it more likely for the butt to come off the bench. So still has the feet firmly planted, won't be as much tension in the legs this way, but is still a good setup, is going to still allow her to create leg drive that's going to drive her back onto her traps, which we'll address more in a future installment of this series. But this is step one for great setup, is pressure in the feet, whether it's tucked back, knee below the hip, or the feet are out in front of the athlete. And again, a athlete with longer shins may have their feet even farther out comparative to what Marissa has here, but pressure into the whole foot, getting as much foot on the ground as possible. Now I want to take a look at an exercise. If you're struggling to get those feet tucked back more, some things that we can do to help you improve that position. So if you're lacking the ability to get the feet tucked back behind you, or having a really hard time getting your whole foot on the ground, or if it's just causing you a ton of discomfort, this is a very simple stretch to do pre-bench training to help you begin to improve that position. Some people would call it a couch stretch, but regardless of what the name is, this is what it's going to look like. And we're looking to stretch the quad and the hip flexor here. So as Marissa moves her front foot a little bit further out, it kind of just goes down into a split squat and sits in as deep a position as possible there. And you can kind of manipulate the position. If she's to push her butt back towards the bench more, is going to stretch the quad a bit more intensely. If she flexes the glute of her right leg and neutrals her hip underneath her more, that's going to stretch the hip flexor more intensely. But holding that stretch, 20 to 40 seconds prior to training, maybe interspersing this with a bit of foam rolling, that's going to stretch the quads, open up the hip flexor a little bit more, and help you achieve that better knee below hip tucked tight setup position. All right, so that is the first installment of our series on pillars of great bench technique. We're looking at creating pressure in the feet, tight setup, a position where your butt's not going to come off the bench. So hopefully that advice plus the couch stretch are going to help you be able to get into a tighter bench position, start loading more weight onto the bar. So thank you to Marissa for demonstrating, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and look for the future installments of this series.
Get expert program design, video analysis, and guidance for powerlifting and weightlifting, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced athlete, through Team Juggernaut's online coaching. Click Learn More to sign up.